We will go to the next speaker, who is Linda Blade, our Linda Blade from Canada, former Olympian athlete. Linda is a sports performance coach and mentor, and Linda is promoting her new book, Unsporting. Of course, it's with a very, very clear subtitle, How Transactivism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sports. Linda, what's your book about? With this subtitle, we can guess. Why did you write it, and why should women read it?
Basically, I wrote this book with co-author Barbara Kay, who's a very well-known journalist in Canada. You can get the book at unsporting.com. You can go there, Unsporting. So the big word, unsporting.com. And I guess basically I'm going to cover three things. Why I wrote the book, or really what it's about. And then secondly, my letter to Japan, to the Japanese people. And then finally, what you can do about it. So it's pretty simple, three things. The book itself is really about the colonization of women's sports by men and the absolute lack of accountability by the authorities in sport. They just have, it's incredible what's happened. And the key elements of the book are, I would say the first part of the book was really stories about the trans identified males who really got my attention, and with my background in sports as a coach caused me to absolutely want to rebel, because it's just so ridiculous. And so, you know, we go through some stories like Fallon Fox, who's the MMA fighter from the USA, who fractured a woman's skull when he's fighting with her, and then he's enjoying it, he says. And then we have Kelly Morgan from Wales, who's, you know, a truck driver by day and rugby player in the women's rugby by night, or whatever, after work, and folding women like deck chairs on the field. And everybody's so on his team, so proud of him. And then we have Hannah Mounsey, who's from Australia, who's a huge man, 6'2" Hulk. And basically, he says that our objection to his big size in women's sports sends the message that, quote unquote, big girls don't belong in sports. That's his rationale for why we're all being bigots. And then we have Rachel McKinnon, Veronica Ivy, who we all know about, women's master cycling champion, and actually a professor, happens to be from Canada, to my utter shame. He uses the logic that, like so many different ridiculous things he's said, and as a thinking professor, you'd think that he should be ashamed, but he basically says that because gymnasts are small, female gymnasts are small, and female high jumpers are tall, men should be in women's sports because of their range and body size, like utterly ridiculous things. And so then this leads to ridiculous policies, right? The policies of the International Olympic Committee, where you only have to live as a woman for 1 year, as if that means anything. It's just stereotypes, and keep their testosterone lower than 10 nanomoles, when most women aren't even up to 2 or 3, or not even actually 1 or 2. So doping, essentially, allowing males to come into women's sports and still be doping. And then we have stupid organizations in Canada, Canadian Center for Ethics in Sport, Canadian Women in Sport, university sports, that are advocating something more extreme even than the Olympic policy, which is no surgery, no requirement for hormones, nothing. In fact, the policy that was being pushed on my organization in Canada, which seems to shock people, so I'll read it again, is, quote, this is actually a statement from the policy: trans individuals should be able to participate in the gender with which they feel most comfortable and safe, which may not be the same in each sport or consistent in subsequent seasons. So you could be a man in one sport 1 year and a woman in another year and a man in another year. Like, you can switch back and forth between sports because gender is fluid. So, you know, you can just flow between categories. So this is the ridiculous thing that I was reading that got me peaked in the first place. And actually the Olympics committee, there was a hint that they're even going to consider this extreme radical policy after the Olympic Games. So we'll see, but I'm hoping they go the other way, of course, and fix it to something rational. And then the book goes on to talk about a brief history, briefly, the history of women in the Olympic Games and how the gatekeeping happened. And then how the tide was beginning to turn because of what World Rugby did, which was amazing. World Rugby was the first organization that finally, really did a good study on, and had people advocating on both sides of the issue at the table, which was the right thing to do. And of course, they found out there was no evidence whatsoever that you can give hormones to a man and make him, bring it down to the level of women. And then talking about the last chapter is, of course, how President Biden erased women, which is disgusting, with his sort of gender identity instead of the Title IX biological sex. And then at the end of the book, I offer solutions. And the main solution that we all agree on, I think, when I go across the board on social media, the main solution is very simple. You can include everybody by having an open category and one that's restricted to females. So anybody who's not 100% female and with the right, hormones and everything, they should feel free to compete in the open. And I think that would resolve a lot of things. So then the second part of this presentation is supposed to be talking about, and of course I want to talk about, the letter to the Japanese people and to the Japanese Olympic Organizing Committee. And really what I wanted to do was, I think the purpose was really fundamentally to help the Japanese, or really give them the heads up so they could avoid the shame now that's being cast upon the Olympics by Laurel Hubbard. Because imagine that a country spends billions of dollars on infrastructure and bringing the games to their country, and then the only thing that's going to be remembered about this Olympic Games is the controversy about one single trans person. And it's just such a disservice and a shame. And the Japanese people deserve better. So I wrote this letter that's been translated now into English, Japanese, French, Italian, and Dutch, and being shared around the world. And basically it just has two things emphasizing, well, first of all, two things that I wanted to expose, the two lies. The first lie is that hormone therapy does not mitigate the advantage. So this is a lie by the IOC that somehow giving a male hormones for a year and bringing his hormones levels down make him any less of an advantage, which it doesn't. The males are still heavier by 20 to 40%. They're still stronger by like almost 50 or 60%, more explosive. You go right down the line. The most extreme one is they are 160% greater punching capacity. Imagine that, 160% higher than women in the way they can punch. So, even in like their heart and their lungs, like you're not going to change those sizes. It's very obvious that you're not going to suddenly have 2 inches smaller bone length just because you think you're a woman. So there's some very obvious things. And then the second lie that the IOC tries to perpetrate is that, but it's only going to be a few and it's not going to really impact anybody. Just be nice. No, even one person like Laurel Hubbard displaces many, many women. And we know over the last few years, and the IOC must have seen this, that there are dozens and almost now 100 trans women that are clearly visible in women's sports. And so this lie that men just won't take advantage of it is absurd, because we're seeing it already. So, it's just, it's impossible to explain the frustration that people like me in sport who have been coaching for so many years. It's frustrating. And we still want to work hard to preserve the integrity of women's sports. So what can we do? So third thing, how can you help? Well, I want, if anybody's there, there's you can look it up. There's a website I've created because I was so outraged by the fact that one trans woman, trans-identified male, I shouldn't say trans woman because not a woman, one trans-identified male, Joanna Harper, did a study of 8 athletes, 8 not even athletes, recreational runners. And on the basis of a very flawed study, which you will see in the book, caused the IOC, got brought into the IOC Medical Commission and was allowed to just listen to, and they took this person as an expert. And the entire policy, think about this, the rules for all the world, for all women in all sports, was changed on the basis of a flawed study of 8 men. So N equals 8. I have a website that sort of addresses this issue, that's particular outrage, and it's you can find it at N, capital N equals EQUALS 8.com. And that's a website that you can go to read about the outrage of these 8, the study, that stupid study that the IOC based their entire policy on this study. And so on that website, there are letters that you can download and send to your leaders. And so I would encourage you to maybe send a letter to your leader or a local sports leader or your prime minister or your president. And also there is a sample letter that you can send to the International Olympic Committee, to President Thomas Bach. And the address is on that site, where if you click on IOC. That's one thing. You can write letters as a group, as an organization, or as a petition, and send it in. You can support women's groups who are fighting hard, like Rowena Edge. You just saw Row, what a great amount of work she's doing in New Zealand, and Catherine Deves in Australia. So the Save Women's Sport, and Beth Stelzer has been amazing in the United States with all of her activism. She's enabled and participated in the states having Save Women's Sports bills. So Save Women's Sports organizations, please support them financially or offer to help. Fair Play for Women in the UK is a very important organization, has done so much amazing work for our side. And of course, this group, Women's Declaration. I mean, we are the most widespread group in the world of women talking to each other. So please support Women's Declaration and spread the word, and Women's Human Rights Campaign. Kara has an idea of demonstrating in front of the NBC, which is the network for the Olympic Games. And there's an outlet in Washington, D.C. I just can't really find anybody who wants to head that up and just go down there and stand in front of the NBC studios and just say, look, just be there. Just demonstrate about the fact that there's male bodies in women's Olympic sports. And don't let these networks get by with, doing this kind of stupidity, like showing all these things without actually understanding the issue. I think the more that we can shine a light on this, the more the IOC will be ashamed of themselves. And I think that's the whole point. They aren't listening to us when we be nice, but when we shame them, maybe they'll come to the table. And I guess as we go along, I'll be adding things to that particular website about what you can do, as it becomes apparent to me. I don't know all of the answers yet, but, I want to thank all the women here who support us and who support women's sports. It's kind of ridiculous. I'll just say in closing, it's kind of ridiculous that this woman in the States, the 100-meter runner, Sha'Carri Richardson, now can't compete in the Olympics because of tiny little bit of THC in her body that was discovered upon the anti-doping test. In the old days, I would have said, fine, like if you break the rules, you break the rules, but not anymore. Because if you let men into women's sports, what difference does it make with one little molecule of THC in a woman's blood? So they've changed the entire equation in my mind. They've changed it. Canadian women who wasn't going to be allowed, a basketball player wasn't going to be allowed to go to the Olympic Games because she's breastfeeding her child, and you're not allowed to have babies in the Olympic Village. Whereas that's also, police. But so, and then bathing caps for afros, like for African American women. I mean, these things are ridiculous. So you police women to the minute microscopic degree, but men can do whatever they want. And this is the message that they're sending us.